Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Solutions to Common Demantra and ASCP Implementation Challenges. My name is Deb Bryant and I'm the Marketing Coordinator at AVATA, and I will be facilitating today's presentation. We are joined by Jim Hetherington, VP of Sales at AVATA, and our presenters today are Trudy Grieve, Senior Principal Consultant at AVATA, and Dwayne Hardiker, Managing Partner at AVATA. Before we get started, I'd just like to go over a few quick housekeeping items. During the webinar, please keep your phone muted throughout the presentation as it is being recorded. We will not be entertaining any questions at the end of the presentation, but we'll send out an email to all of you with a copy of the entire presentation along with our contact information. The webinar recording will also be available on our SlideShare account as well as on our website. We also want to let you know about an upcoming event. On May 10th, we will be presenting a webinar on SNOP in the cloud for J.D. Edwards. And now I will turn the presentation over to Jim.
Thanks, Deb. And thank you to everyone for taking the time to be with us today. Again, I'm Jim Hetherington, Vice President of Sales with AVATA. And before we get started, I've got one slide up front to make sure everybody has a baseline understanding of who we are. And I promise to keep it short so we can get right into today's content. AVATA is a supply chain consultancy that supports companies using Oracle solutions for supply chain planning. And I would ask that you remember two things about us. First, supply chain planning, be it demand planning, supply planning, or SNOP, this competence has been our focus for 15 years. And we've married the domain expertise that results from that focus with Oracle software skills to help our clients make the best use of Oracle tools that support the supply chain team, be it new implementations or getting more value from what you're already using. Second, we are an Oracle co-development partner and a leader in Oracle's offerings in the cloud. AVATA provides Oracle tools in a true cloud offering in the AVATA Business Cloud. And today, with new cloud solutions being rolled out by Oracle, our clients depend on us to help them make intelligent decisions about how to marry new cloud technologies with today's on-premise investments. We're having a lot of these conversations recently, and more than happy to have them with you if you've got similar questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Trudy as she begins today's webinar.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we can give you some of the challenges that go along with implementing Demantra. There are basically 5 major challenges that I think everybody faces, and I'm going to talk about those individually, but change management, the actual implementation, the data, the management of the process, and the configuration of the tools. And we'll go through that. And at the end, I'm going to give you a few Demantra tips and tricks. This is more about some of the new facilities that have been brought into it that you may not be aware of if you've actually already implemented, and just to give you some ideas of where this product is going. So let's get right to it and talk about change management. Unfortunately, change management is one of the biggest struggles that we always face doing a Demantra implementation. It really requires a lot of commitment from the overall organization. And in doing that, you need to think about change management and what is a best practice? How do we implement a best practice? How do we make changes to the way we're doing it rather than just trying to take an existing system and going to replicate it? I've always found that people are fairly resistant to change, and that's in any industry, any implementation, or any side of it. But if we understand that the change is there, we can actually mitigate against it. One of the ways we do that is making sure that we've assigned ownership. And ownership needs to be assigned from 2 different angles. One is the actual project of implementing Demantra, and one is from the process side. And I can't overemphasize the importance of understanding the process and looking for that in a change management type of way. We need, as we go through demand planning, to start encouraging collaboration, get conversations going, get it with your salespeople, get it with your marketing people, get it with product development, collect market information, whether that's current environment, whether that's the way the economy is moving, etc. All of that helps educate the people, encourages the idea of change and collaboration. Metrics and measures are extremely important. I'll talk a little bit about more of that when we get into the data side and the process side, but I just want to reiterate here that it's a learning device. It helps people do a better job. It should not ever be to make them feel badly about the job they're doing. Another area that I've found to be interesting in most of demand with people is making them understand the difference between unconstrained demand. It's demand that our customers want, nothing to do with what our factories can produce. And then finally, change management comes across the whole EBS side of it. We need to have firm policies and procedures in place for the ERP systems. How do we update items? How do we update customers? What happens with our ship to level? How do we assign our hierarchies, etc.? A lot of organizations have had this, but not really to the point that they've got strong control. So I encourage everybody to think about what process change you can actually make as it comes back to your ERP side of it. So talking about implementation a little bit, I just want to highlight the point that you need to understand what is Demantra, what is demand planning. And one of the key things that I would like people to think about is that it is not a source system. It is not the system of record. That needs to be the ERP system. What Demantra does supply, it's the source of the demand plan. And that demand plan may be the plan that's fed down. It may also be budget numbers. It may be other forms of metrics that you want to keep and take care of. Anything to do with the planning side of it, that's the source of Demantra. Anything that's coming from your item side or your location side, that's not source, that comes from ERP. And then finally, think about the fact that Demantra is really not a reporting tool. So if you start getting into multiple levels of lagging of history and metrics, it may not be the ideal tool to look at more than maybe 6 months or 12 weeks of a waterfall type report. When you're doing it, you really want to make sure that you've assigned sufficient resources. This is an area that I've always found in the years I've been implementing these products that people don't remember. They have a full-time job. They don't have time to take on another 50% workload. So if you're going to do an implementation, support it in a way that these resources can actually manage the implementation and make sure it's successful for you. Are really important to me in Demantra. It's a configurable system. And so a lot of these configurations can be made fairly quickly, and iterating allows people to see them, to make sure they're comfortable with the direction the implementation is going. So don't be nervous if implementers want to do 3, 4, 5 different iterations of bringing Demantra up. Data validation is something that quite often is not given its due credit. It is extremely important to Demantra, and as we get into data, we can talk a little bit more about that. Pure implementation side, there are 2 things that I really want to focus on. One is decisions. Every implementation needs to have a strong steering committee. These people can support both the issues and the opportunities. It can support the change management. It can support how you want to move your business into a whole new phase. So having a steering committee to help guide a project team is very important. Stage gate process to me is critical. It allows this is going in this implementation right from understanding the as-is to understanding the to-be type process to understanding what happens with assembly and doing a lot of iterations to transformation to take it over for it to become more of your personal product. When you get down to the point that you're moving through that stage gate and you're getting to beyond assembly, you don't want to start revisiting finalized decisions. Or the system says it's working for you, don't go back and try to revisit it. And part of that revisiting is going to come up when we talk about the process and how you should think about implementing a Demantra. Again, iterations just lead to good decisions. Don't hesitate to that. So one of the really important sides are harder parts to change is really the hierarchy. You need to have a solid hierarchy to be able to enhance the engine results. But that hierarchy needs to think about more than just engine results. It needs to think about your process levels. It needs to think about what level you're going to manage your metrics. How are you going to lag your data and ensure that you can go back and see how well the business actually did 5 months out, 4 months out, 3 months out. And when I say months, I'm just using a generic term. It could also be weeks, obviously. So the whole idea of hierarchy is making sure you're covering things like that, archiving levels for that you're getting the right metric information to be able to analyze how well you've done and do the analysis. So the planning level is important. The planning level, but if you have a large number of SKUs, you may want to be able to plan at an aggregated level. If you have more levels in your hierarchy, then you're giving the opportunity to both plan at a higher level, its power to push it down to the SKUs, or as well to make sure that you've got the right levels to go down to if you have particular issues with new products, end of line, discontinued, etc. One of the things in implementation, always make sure you've got reasonable timelines. I've seen many cases where people would like Demantra done in a short time frame, but you need to consider holidays, Christmas breaks. You need to consider whether it's budgeting time of year. If you want your organization to be successful, you need to make sure that you've embraced doing this implementation from your own side as well. And you just need to think through some of those things. And key to success to me, training, 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 training. I believe in doing navigation training before a project even starts. And that's simply to facilitate helping people to improve the design because they understand the base system a little bit better. And making sure that you're training your own people. Train the trainer as a concept is very successful in helping organizations embrace what they're doing and how they need to move forward. Data and Demantra. We all know data basically gets its results from being a transactionally based system. It brings data in from ERP. That data sets up the structure of Demantra. One of the things that people need to really think about in a project in implementing is data validation. It is key. You don't have good data, you don't have a good system, you don't have good engine results, basically the garbage in, garbage out theory. Having somebody that owns that data is critical. Somebody that is actually spending the time to do the validation to make sure that everything coming in from the core systems is actually correct. Typically, getting priority on getting your data early in your implementation is important. The sooner data comes into Demantra, the sooner users can see it. So when you're about as is a new process and the to-be process, letting people actually see how that's going to happen is very important. It makes it quicker for them to understand where the change management is taking place and why they should embrace it. So again, always expect more data iterations and try to get data quickly. Don't wait until standard integration is built. Just get data in a rough format, get it in and start working with it. And when you do this and you see there's a data problem, it needs to be addressed. And addressing that is through setting up those policies and procedures to ensure that good data is always coming through. Relativity to Demantra is important. So demand, you want customer request date versus shipments. Shipments, if you're late, if you're expediting, don't really tell you what the customer wanted. And remember we said unconstrained demand is important. If the customer wanted it, then that's what we should be planning for in the future. Default warehouse, to me, is extremely important to make sure you're not creating some self-fulfilling prophecies. A ship from warehouse, you may have expedited it. You may have moved that data from one warehouse to another for some reason. What you want to always think about is a default warehouse. Where should that data have come from? Where's the organization that should have shipped it? And that's really important. And then ownership of the master data needs to be clearly set up so people understand it. Process. Now this is an important side. We're going to talk a little bit about design workshop and the criticality of that design workshop. it takes time and effort to do this. It takes time and effort to think about it, to manage. So don't start out trying to get the optimal system that has absolutely everything in it. Just crawl first. After crawling, think about walking and running. But move this through in a process that people can actually embrace it, understand it, and move forward. Best practice versus replication. Here's where you've got an opportunity to start talking about a lot of the best practice opportunities. Metrics. What metrics do you want to use? How are we going to judge how well the forecast has been done? How do we want to lag the data? What are the levels that we want to basically be doing this lagging at? And what's the archiving that needs to take place? And again, when you think about that, think about your process in many ways. Think about it in terms of your exception management. How do I manage this business just by exception and not spending quite as much time actually looking at every single item? Think about a multiple forecast you could bring in. Do you want forecasts you can compare your budget to your final forecast? Is there other information you can bring in that's a pure sales forecast? So think about your process in a lot of different ways, but look for the opportunities to simplify it and improve it. Make sure that you're looking for ways to make it easier. When you're doing your design, I can only say everybody needs to be there right from the word go. You can't have people coming in and coming out of the meetings. You can't have people that join later and didn't part of the design. You start really creating the problems of change management. And as you do that, think about the roles and responsibilities that are defined. Make sure they're clear. Make sure everybody knows what portion and what role they're going to play in this overall process. So again, think about best practice. Think about all the things that you can change. Think about ways to make it better, and start thinking about really improvement and simplification. I think those are my key takeaways on process. Understand the value of the process. Always look for opportunities for return on investment. Understand that improvement takes time. You can't do this immediately. You're not going to start seeing improvement from adding a system like this immediately, but set reasonable timelines and reasonable targets. So does it matter what level you're forecasting at when you start? No. What really matters is that you set that baseline and you set an opportunity for you to improve. From a pure demand planning standpoint, make sure you always remember that it takes two things to make a good demand plan: statistical forecast and judgment. Judgment is not automated. It's the human that's collaborated, that's worked with the sales group, that's worked with marketing, that can really add value. And I'll say it again for a third time, unconstrained planning. We need to make sure that we're looking at that and understanding that we're trying to build to what we think the customers want. Configuration, as we've said, it's a configurable system. You can make configuration changes quite easily. Try to stick with out of the box. Don't try to put in complicated logic into Demantra, because it makes it more complicated a system, makes it slower, and also means it's more difficult for people to understand. But make sure that whoever you've got, there's internal ownership to test that configuration. It should not be reliant on just an implementation team. That testing and configuration helps people better understand how they need to move forward, how they need to manage change. I can't say enough about how important documentation is, but it's also important that documents are signed off. And this helps enforce both what the steering committee wants. It also does manage that you're going through a proper stage gate process. Configuration, iterations, they're all combined. You have one, you have the other. You can't not be in that place. As you're going through configuration, as you're going through business process, you need to make sure that you're prepared to speak up, address issues, work towards resolutions, make sure people understand your concerns, and find ways to mitigate those concerns. This is a change process. You need to be able to be part of it. The engine out of the box will give you reasonable results. It still needs to be tuned after implementation. You either need to always accept that you're going to learn that internally, or you're going to have to bring somebody externally. Both ways work as long as you've got somebody who really is the owner, owns this system. And then finally, Business Modeler is a separate tool that's used, and Business Modeler needs to be an educated person internally. again, it's something that somebody should be right there with the project team from day one, working with them and learning and understanding this. Okay, a couple of tips and tricks. This is really more relating to some of the newer parts of Demantra that I just wanted to make sure that everybody was kind of aware of some of these things. Member management is a separate tool. Member management does work, does require a fair amount of knowledge and how to use sure that somebody is fairly well versed on that. It is a little on the complicated side, and I would probably say that as you member manage, you're probably into about 5 minutes for a combination. But it is a useful tool. It is there. Just make sure how to use it. So chaining is provided. It's a separate tool. We find it extremely complex. And so what we've tended to do is use chaining. It's more efficient where you're simply doing a chaining from one item to another. And chaining is important when you have a new product introduction. How do you make sure that you're getting a good forecast? How do you want to go back and ensure that you're taking some history from a like item and bringing that over? So that's a simple form of chaining. There is a new functionality that's come out called a similar item. And a similar item provides an opportunity of actually doing chaining as well, and chaining where you can actually deal with increasing the volume, decreasing the volume. You can take old history, you cannot take old history. So in some ways it's a very powerful tool. The risk here is that you actually have to key in your new item number. And that item isn't coming from your core ERP. So if the item wasn't a good item, if somebody made a mistake, then that may become a problem that needs to be removed from it. But it truly is an effective replacement for chaining. So if you have that facility, if you're in a version that's actually using it, then it's something that I think you may want to take a look at. There's a facility they've added now. It's a method, and that method is the ability to remove combinations. So it's a very close-up, unique combination. It's that particular UPC or SKU times that particular ship to or lowest level of your database. Offline functionality isn't used a lot, but it's pretty powerful. It allows, if you want to send information out to sales reps or you want to take information offline, not have to be connected to VPN. This is a great facility to use. User comes back in and can automatically update the database. So they're looking at an off-the-line version of Demantra, but only for that single worksheet that they're working with. Again, pretty powerful. I've got to use it quite a few times and received. It makes it less complicated for salespeople to be able to work and add input and collaborate. You're probably all aware of export and import of Excel. Big issue there is make sure you remember that if somebody takes that export, they can't change the layout, otherwise they're going to have an import issue. And there's a number of methods that Oracle's built in to add a new item, to view an item, to edit an item, or to delete an item. And all I'm going to say is danger. This is something that should be limited, controlled, or just removed as options. New items really should be coming in from the core system. If an item needs to be changed, hierarchy needs to be changed, again, you're far better to bring that in from the core system. But those facilities are there. And that's pretty much it. I will turn this over to Dwayne now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Trudy. That is a tough act to follow. I will certainly do my best. Hopefully everyone can now see my screen showing ASCP. So again, very common themes, shouldn't be a shocker. I want to quickly cover change management process, data, and configuration. I'm going to start randomly out of order a little bit. Data I'm really not going to cover because I think it's beating a dead horse. We all know that any planning system requires good data. And, you know, ASCP, Demantra, none of them are an exception. So garbage in, garbage out. The one thing I will do is put a shameless plug in is after seeing data being such an issue for years, AVATA built what's called the Data Control Center specifically for supply chain data to help our clients manage all the critical aspects of data, data management, reporting, exception handling, and having those processes in place, managing the data is extremely critical. And it's not just, oh, you planner, you now have to make sure you keep your data clean. In a lot of cases, you need to really create a separate function, separate roles around the data, and make sure that people have the tools to manage it. And the Data Control Center is one of the tools that we provide. That's all I'm going to say on data. On change management, you know, where a lot of this perspective is it's coming from our own challenges over the years at AVATA with ASCP implementations, but also over the years going in and doing health checks and assessments for companies that had already implemented ASCP. And so this is kind of a lot of the common things we see. And again, it's low-hanging fruit. Overly complex starting off. We see this all the time, right? Again, the cliche crawl, walk, run, yet you see people go from Excel-based planning systems to extremely complex advanced planning systems, and the gap is too large. The bridge in complexity is too much. By doing that, you alienate users because the adoption and validation is much more difficult. When the numbers that ASCP is spitting out can't be understood to some degree, then you lose trust in the system. And again, it's easy to validate numbers, typically coming from an Excel-based planning system, and then making that leap over to an advanced planning system. You want to make sure you have a period of time where you can validate the numbers and you didn't come out of the gate overly complicated. But that doesn't mean you don't design for the end state. So, and this goes back to what Trudy was saying in the design workshops. It's key to have the critical constituents and stakeholders, and it's key to look to where you want to get to and design to that up front so you don't box yourself into a corner. However, break it up then into phases, palatable phases, to drive that success and move quickly along the ROI path. One of the things that we kind of demand is process champions. Process champions can be a super user, but typically these are supervisors or managers that are empowered to drive the change of the new systems and processes. It's someone that has enough detail in the day-to-day working knowledge of the system so they're creditable and they can drive influence, but they truly are also in a strong enough position that they can drive the change. Executive support, one of the things we, again, commenting on what Trudy said, allow reasonableness and time frames, right? It always, I find comical when we go to do a ASCP implementation and someone says, well, 60 days, 90 days. Even if you do go live in 90 days, that's just the start, right? The real work starts when you go live in any planning system, because we all know planners, right? When a planner goes through a test cycle and they look at numbers, it doesn't resonate with them because the numbers came from a copy database that was a week, a month old, and until it's live and in production and they're looking at, this is my plan, here's my master schedule, here's the numbers I got to build this week, this month, then the real impact and change happens. Ensure the executives understand that, and again, that it's a journey. Make sure at the onset of that journey, the objectives, phases, timelines, and metrics are all aligned from the executive to the planner. So everyone has a clear vision of where we're going, how long it's going to take to get there. Doesn't mean there's going to be variations, and then you may deviate as needed. Business conditions change, etc. But again, lay the stuff out up front. As Trudy nailed it, we see this time and time again. People cut out training. Of all the things to skimp on, don't skimp on training. Train the trainer is part of our methodology and what we believe is the most effective way to truly go about training. But if it's done right, your consultant should support the process, They should help with the material, but it's up to the clients to produce the person or people that are going to be available enough and committed to learn it and then train their peers. Because as we all know, we learn best from our peers. It's credible, it's knowledgeable, but you got to make sure you invest in the program. Skill sets assessments. This is often a tough pill for people to swallow, and that is when you go from an Excel-based planning system or an unconstrained MRP system to a more complex constrained advanced planning system, you got to understand who your planners are and take them along that journey. And you got to assess their skill sets, right? We're not all equal. So make sure you understand each and every planner's skill set and know what it's going to take to get them to that level. And then for the managers out there, sometimes you got to make the tough decisions. And that is, you know, someone might have had a skill set that filled a good role in the old process. You might have to look at that organizational structure based on the skill sets moving forward. So a lot about what I'm going to talk about now is going to be process. Because while AVATA is an implementation firm, we're front and foremost practitioners, supply chain practitioners. So we've lived the processes. So again, when you're starting off on this journey, understand how you're aligning the roles and responsibilities across the process. And that is from the demand planner, master scheduler, production planner, materials planning, all the different roles. And you want to break the process down to a system level and understand how each role is going to interact with the system. What do they need out of the system? And what data are they expecting? Again, we'll get into more of this in further slides, but we call this software-based process reengineering. And I'll get more into that in a minute. When you're looking at this process, defining your process or reengineering your processes, there'll be parts of your process that will stay in place because it was a competitive differentiator for you. And there'll be a part that you should really look at best practice first, as is. Look at aligning by not only roles and responsibility, but strategic accounts, or how your products are laid out, or by contract manufacturer, or business units, or onshore, offshore. Step back and look at what the process looks like and how you want to align it with the roles and responsibilities. Look at potentially segmenting your supply chain, right? By that, I mean, you don't have all these different processes, but you might have a couple separate standard processes based on strategic customers or a very different product line that requires a different set of supply chain policies and principles, right? Very similar to the way you classify items. You classify items as A, B, C, and you manage them differently. You may similarly segment your supply chain in such a fashion and maybe even categorize customers A, B, C. Again, things to think about when you're going through these process designs and how the system is going to support it. Okay, so now we've talked about roles and responsibilities, we've talked about aligning the process, and also understanding where the functions fall, right? So what someone did yesterday may not be the same function they're going to do tomorrow, right? Again, step back, look at the organizational alignment. You know, who's going to handle drop-in orders, order change requests? Is it customer service? Is it operations? You know, who's going to own supporting S&OP? What does that mean in the process? What does that mean in the system? And again, everything down to, do you have a global office that is, you know, potentially handling a lot of your purchasing expedites? What does that mean? And when I say what does that mean, it comes down to what does it ultimately get to in the system? Because at the end of the day, it's about how the people are interacting, interfacing with the system. So Trudy nailed on this too. This is so important. Software-based process reengineering means you think about the process in the context of the system you're implementing as opposed to, you know, pure whiteboard, blue sky. But to do that, you got to educate and train to some level all the constituents right from the beginning of the design workshops so they make decisions based on an awareness of the system. And that will change the decisions that get made. Your consultants better be advising you and guiding you down that path, steering you into the strengths and away from the weaknesses of the system, because every system has strengths and weaknesses. So that should be known as you're designing these processes. Time and time again, we walk into implementations and someone says, well, ASCP can do this, but should it be doing this? Who asked that question? Should it be doing this? Should you have done it this way? Doesn't matter if it can do it. And again, understand the different roles within the system and what activities they'll be playing. So ultimately what you want to go to, and what we've seen is from chaos to cadence. Now that doesn't mean a super regimented, no flexible planning system, because we all know planning is about the Tuesday afternoon phone call you get from sales saying, you know, I know we forecasted 10,000 next week, but we have an upside of another 5,000. Can we meet that, right? So the systems and the processes have to be able to work within a certain defined amount of chaos, flexibility, and you know, for ad hoc requests. Especially when, you know, but the key is to have a cadence and have a normalized standard process to handle all the other things. So you don't have to worry about those, right? Get into the cadence, especially if you're in global operations or you're running an S&OP. Or another example is if you're in the retail industry and you've got minimum order quantities that before you place that out to a supplier or contract manufacturer, you might have to collect all these different quantities through the different, you know, regions or globe. So again, it's important to lay out that cadence. Establish a monthly planning calendar. Every good supply chain organization has a monthly planning calendar. Some of the tools we use is we take that planning calendar and then we align it, the activities to roles and responsibilities. We create a RACI, right? Who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be informed, who needs to be consulted. And then taking it to the next level is, now let's orchestrate the execution of all these activities. Who's doing what, when? So again, you're starting to put boundaries around the process. And again, going from chaos to cadence. Document your processes. But again, document them based on reality. Make them role-based, and they should also include event and exception-driven, right? If an exception happens consistently, it's not an exception. You should be able to standardize it, put boundaries around it, and move it from chaos into a cadence. Publish the clear calendar of weekly and daily activities by role. So coming out of an ASCP implementation, it should be very clear that the master scheduler is going to be doing this on Mondays or this on the first week of the month. And the production planner is going to do this on Monday, that on Tuesday. In this example, you know, the regional supply planner is reviewing recommendations and releasing planned orders on Monday. Then on Tuesday, looking at the pull-ins and pull-outs. So again, document it, create clear lines of visibility to the process of who's doing what. The fun part now gets to taking it the next level down to the system. So if you've done this right, it should be very easy to walk the steps, the path from the kind of strategic design that you start off with all the way down to how is it impacting me, the planner. One of the things we see often, and it's so easy to do right, but it gets missed 90% of the time, queries, folders, and pegging. The process and the activities by role should ultimately end up getting mapped to folders and queries within ASCP. They should be configured, and I use the word customized, but everyone that knows folders in ASCP, it's really not a customization, but they should be configured to the roles and what fields and what data does that role require. Because again, if you look at out-of-the-box ASCP, there's a tremendous amount of information, so much that it's overwhelming, and a lot of it is unnecessary for me and my role. So I need to make it usable for me. Just a point of note, while it's not done the exact same way, the whole concept of this also applies to rapid planning. Rapid planning does come with a higher level of actual configurability and usability because of the GUIs. But going back to ASCP, again, you can see here some examples. Every form that a planner, a buyer, a master scheduler is going into an ASCP, it should be framed around a custom folder. In this scenario, you can see that there's a default supply folder, there's a reschedules folder. Again, you can build the folders out to map to the process, and all the data within these folders and the columns should be a specific order that's logical to the process and the role. One word of caution with these folders and creating the queries is, older releases had issues with it. It's gotten better, but you got to be a little bit careful with how you're setting up the auto query and open as default. You can get hung up sometimes particularly if you select always and open as default together. Queries and exceptions. I kid you not, we've walked into implementations that planners did not know how to create queries. This is incredibly powerful capability within ASCP. And again, there should be queries built based on the process and the roles and responsibilities. So a planner should have queries built for him, queries to take actions, queries to view his appropriate exceptions. And those queries should be something that's understood, and these are the queries I execute on Monday. And then it should be, once I get the data from the query, I'm looking at it in a folder with how I need it, and then how do I execute the actions appropriately. Lay out the appropriate exceptions. ASCP comes with a tremendous number of exception messages. It can be overwhelming, and for anyone on this call went into the first test cycle in ASCP and it said 1,300 reschedule in messages, 4,000 push-outs. So it's going to, there's no easy way of getting over that hump. However, not all exception messages are relevant to your business, to your process, your solution. So understand which ones make sense. If you're a build-to-order company, then you really don't care about planned orders tied to late forecast, as an example. One quick note is in release 12.2, you can actually turn off exceptions generated by the engine. This has a couple key benefits. One is it can improve performance because it doesn't have to go through and generate these exception messages and calculate them. But again, it's that little added touch to make the plan that much more usable for the planner. They don't have to weed through, unnecessary exception messages to get to what they need. Again, going to, extending the whole concept of, taking the system, down to a usability for the planner, you know, personalize the workbench. This is something I personally stumbled on as a planner, but only after I had been in the system and using ASCP for quite a while. And again, if done right and set up right, these preferences can make the system that much more applicable to you. Pegging. Again, anyone who is familiar with ASCP realizes that you need a PhD to figure out pegging in some cases. It's incredibly powerful, but it can be very complex. So make sure you understand what pegging is and how it functions. And we have very, very often found that problems with the plan came back to pegging. High projected variable balance caused by safety stock pegging. Planned orders being recommended early. Projected variable balance below safety stock. Existing supplies pegged to safety stock and not real demands, right? So something to think about. Starting off with the concept of crawl, walk, run. Start with a standard FIFO or standard pegging. But know that the optimal pegging for most implementation will be leveraging, and the best plan results will be to leverage priority pegging, but make sure that you've got the profile option set correctly. Another note here, in 12.1.3, and I personally don't recall which patch it is, but it gives you the ability to run Excel queries as part of the ASCP plan generation. Incredibly powerful stuff. One particular query produces a simplified Excel pegging. So this is something that, you know, is a way to get a lot of bang for your buck in pegging without, you know, requiring the complexity of the standard ASCP. And there's a whole lot more. We could talk for hours on specific aspects of ASCP. I'm going to go through a couple things that we've run across. Constraints. Again, if you're coming from an Excel-based plan and not an MRP system, I would typically recommend don't use constraints. Start with an unconstrained plan first. Or if you're in an unconstrained plan, you want to go to constraints, again, layer in constraints. Do not put every constraint into the system in all at once. You'll never validate the plan. You won't understand. It'll become a black box, and you'll alienate your users. Layer them in. Let them understand what each layer of constraints is doing and how it's impacting the plan. Caution when using purchasing constraints. I remember the first time we turned that on, we pushed out, we had one item that was not a critical item, that had a purchase order date that was not being maintained, and because of that one item, all the other purchase orders got pushed out to align to that, which you wouldn't want to do that, right? So again, use caution when you're turning on purchasing constraints. Understand how it impacts the plan. I've already touched on use fewer constraints. Example, if you're using capacity constraints, you want to do an ECC plan around capacity constraints, think about starting with bottleneck resources as opposed to trying to get down to every single resource level. And again, as you're laying these constraints in, we have seen challenges around sequence-dependent setups and understanding how that works in a constraint mode, especially when you have multiple constraints. Order modifiers. There's a lot of order modifiers that are really critical. Basic stuff that we see that doesn't get done. Going back to segmentation of your items. You shouldn't be purchasing C items with the same frequency and quantity as you're purchasing A items. So you should have your order modifiers in the system reflected appropriately. And there's a lot of other different order modifiers that help make the plan more reasonable and produce a better output. It's also, a lot of these order modifiers can help reduce nervousness, right? If you're going to schedule, recommend a pull-in or a push-out, and it's only a day, I don't want to see it. I don't need to see it, right? Because a day really doesn't impact me one way or the other, right? Things like that can really help reduce the number of those exception messages you're getting. Plan runtime, often a problem in a lot of clients. The ASCP plan takes a long time. There are a lot of things you can do, especially in the later releases of ASCP. But a good DBA can really, there's a lot of tricks, you know, it's more technical than what this webinar is going to cover, but there are some DBA things that can really help increase performance. Collections, same thing. We've had challenges with collections being optimized. There are things in the later releases of ASCP to help with this. One of the things in particular that we've done over the years is you can break up collections, and things that are running in sequence you can parallelize. Profile options, we could have a webinar just on profile option ASCP. Some of them can be very complex, and they can be very not obvious. The name of the profile option and what it does to the plan is not obvious at all. So understand the profile options and how they impact the plan. One in particular, if you ever want to understand if your consulting firm has ever done ASCP, the first thing they'll do is set this profile option to no. Share plan partitions, right? If it's a good way to just kind of sanity check, because if you've ever done an ASCP implementation, you'll want this to no. Otherwise, right out of the gate, you run into problems with plans. Forecast consumption is another one that we see that this doesn't get thought out through, especially if you're running Demantra and integrating into ASCP. There's a school of thought, I'm of that school of thought, that you should be looking at forecast analysis and consumption in Demantra. It's a great tool for that. It should be part of the demand planning process. But there's also the mathematical aspect of taking that unconstrained forecast, running it into ASCP, and consuming it. Again, there's some newer functionality around this that makes it pretty good on how you can break that down at lower levels. I mean, when you get into global forecasting and regions and zones, again, it adds a layer of complexity. You've got to really test it and understand how it's going to impact the plan. Leverage multiple plan versions, actual different plans. It's not uncommon to have a supply chain, especially a complex supply chain, to have multiple plans for various reasons. Whether it's I'm a build to order for this product line, or I'm an engineer to order, therefore I only want this plan running against sales orders. Or I'm doing I want to do a quarter end projection of inventory based on just my sales order demand. For your S&OP process, create a copy of your production plan, and then allows you to do kind of your separate S&OP plan where you can do some what-if scenarios without messing around with your production plan. An ATP plan, and then various constraint modes. It's not uncommon where you might have a couple different plans modeling different constraints. The challenge with this is, in pure ASCP, it's tough to understand how the different plans, how you actually compare them and analyze them. Oftentimes, if you have folders created properly, it's still going to require you to dump this into Excel. Every planner has a pretty savvy way to do pivot tables and come up with this, but it does take a little bit of extra additional effort. If you have APC, well, then it's a whole different ballgame, because there's a lot of power within APCC or rapid planning in doing just this. The last thing I want to leave you with is upgrade. AVATA has done previously 2 webinars around upgrading for Demantra and ASCP. Those presentations are out there. They talk about literally all the features and functionality over the last 10 years, all the way up to the latest version of Demantra and ASCP. If you're on 12.1.3, if you're on 11.5.10, you really should be thinking about upgrading. The new capabilities, the new GUIs are pretty fantastic. And you really get a lot of usability in the system in the latest releases of Demantra and ASCP. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Deb.
Thank you, Dwayne. This concludes our webinar presentation. If you have any questions, would like further conversation regarding the materials discussed today, or if we can be of any assistance to you, please contact us at connect@avata.com. I'd like to thank Dwayne, Jim, and Trudy for their time today. And on behalf of AVATA, thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, guys. Have a good day.